Hey, Josh.
Oh, hey Sid.
What's wrong?
I was just thinking, this has been a really crazy year for me.
It has?
Yeah, I mean, I've continued to do this show. At the beginning of this year, I graduated from high school, and I turned 18. So, I guess I'm really not a kid anymore.
Where are you going with this?
Well, you know how I look at the obscure and underrated games from the past?
Yeah?
Well, I was thinking, in honor of the new year and me getting older,
Yeah, you're old.
I'm going to look at an obscure game from my past. A game I always talked about to the kids on the playground at school, but they never knew what I was talking about.
Weren't you supposed to review a Christmas game?
Oops. When I was a kid, I didn't know the first-party franchises for companies. I never realized Pokemon was made by Nintendo until I saw the logo at the end of the credits of the anime. Like I've said, I never played a Mario game until 64, and I only played Ocarina of Time because my older brother wanted it. Usually, I just got whatever my dad bought for me. But I also remember watching my brothers play games with my cousin when she babysat us. Stuff like Donkey Kong Country and Zombies Ate My Neighbors. But there was one game in particular I remembered so vividly, but could never remember the name of it. Well, after nearly 15 years, I finally found it. And that mysterious game from my childhood is Claymates. Claymates was released for the Super Nintendo in 1993 by Interplay, who you may know as the publishers of Boogerman, Another World, the first Fallout games, and Clay Fighter.
What? Was this just their claymation period?
Yeah, it's a little odd. The story is about a boy named Clayton. His father is a scientist that has developed a serum that can turn humans into animals. However, an evil shaman wants his serum.
Ew!
Not that. When he is denied the serum, you just keep making it sound worse. He kidnaps Clayton's father and turns Clayton into a ball of clay. So, traveling from the exotic location of the backyard to the never used in every other game as a basic world, Pacific, Japan, Africa, and finally outer space, because why not? But honestly, that's something I like about the story. It's silly, and it knows it's silly. Along the way, you collect power-ups that transform Clayton into different animals, so it's up to this unlikely hero to rescue his father, the serum, and the world. Now, this is not only an original idea, but a very creative one. Sure, it's the standard save the world story, but being turned into clay, a shaman, it's ridiculous. That's what makes this plot unique and pretty cool.
If only we could say the same about the gameplay.
So, as I said, you play as this ball of clay, rolling around, jumping, and punching enemies. When you collect different colored circles, you can transform into different things such as a mouse, a cat, a duck, and a fish, each with their own unique abilities.
Something so perplexing to me is they have a silly plot dealing with a shaman, a scientist, a serum that turns people into clay, yet they made the gameplay just simple. Occasionally there's puzzles, but just very little variety.
None of the levels stand out. They become repetitive, and when you move on to a different world, it's just a change of scenery, and maybe one other element added. I can't understand why they didn't make everything over the top.
After a certain number of levels, you encounter a boss. Now, as we all know, Joshua loves bosses.
Not in this game. The bosses here are just boring. And you'd think that a game from the same team that made Clay Fighter, which I'll admit has some pretty creative characters, could do the same for this. So, instead of imaginative bosses, we get a dog that flaps his ears to fly. Yeah,
That's A+ material right there.
but thankfully these battles can be finished fairly quickly.
There's not much to say about the bonus stages either. It's nice that they tried using the super effects chip to its full potential, but it just ends up being something that reminds me of Super Glove Ball. That's not a good thing.
I can describe the gameplay for Claymates in 2 words: confusing and frustrating. Now, why is it confusing? Let me explain. Throughout the levels, you can find circles, squares, and triangles. From what I can tell, occasionally you can find these boxes and you hit them and they create platforms, sometimes these tornadoes that kill the enemies. But the thing is, these shapes can be really hard to find, so what's the point of looking for them?
I don't know.
And that's part of what makes this game so confusing. They have these shapes displayed at the top of the screen, so you think they're important, so you try looking for them, only to realize they're unnecessary.
And even though you have different animals to change into, again, why not have gone the full way and made it just as creative as the plot is? Why not transform into things like dinosaurs? Or maybe a killer snowman? Sorry, I keep making Clay Fighters references. It's just so strange. Very rarely do you need to be a specific animal, and most of the powers are only useful for finding the gems and shapes, which, as I just mentioned, are pointless. The only reason to collect the gems is to go to the bonus stage, which we already mentioned isn't all that fun. This could have been a cool concept where you need to change between animals to complete certain puzzles, or even multiple animals, but instead all it does is try and add something to an overall bland platformer. The only reason you'll care about turning into the animals is because it gives you an extra hit. Speaking of which, why is Claymates a frustrating game? I don't know. Maybe because the controls are horrible. A lot of games nowadays try to be super realistic. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It makes it more familiar to the player. But there are some occasions where making a game realistic is just bad. This game is one of those. Just because a character is made out of clay doesn't mean he needs to control like it. When you're playing as the ball, you can barely jump. I'm not asking for him to be freaking silly putty, but you fall off cliffs and hit hazards very easily. But the annoyance levels only increase when you turn into one of the animals. When you start running, you'll often outrun the screen, so you have to stop and make sure there aren't any enemies or other hazards in front of you. And of course, they made sure to put the spikes close together to make the jumps that much more nerve-wracking. You'll find yourself dying many times, but don't worry, because Claymates has unlimited continues. Yippee! Well, what's something good I can say about the gameplay? Like I said, the concept of changing characters had potential, but they should have made it so you need each character to solve specific puzzles, instead of just making them feel unimportant and unneeded to progress in the game. Also, occasionally when you do figure out where to go, the gameplay can be somewhat fun, but it's quickly ended when you get an onslaught of hazards or get stuck somewhere. So many things could have made Claymates a fun and unique platformer, but unfortunately, due to elements that lead to nothing, confusing level layouts, frustrating controls,
very little variety with the gameplay. Overall, it's just a mess. With a unique storyline, but dreadful gameplay, is the presentation for Claymates anything to write home about? Yes and no. First, let's talk about the graphics. They did a good job digitizing these models, even though sadly they're all generic, boring animals. In some areas, it looks better than others, but it's a very cool style. But just like the gameplay, nothing feels outrageous as the plot, which is an opportunity they missed out on taking advantage of.
Surprisingly, the music is also pretty good. Except they ruin it by making it so repetitive. The song doesn't change until you go to another world, so you're just gonna keep hearing the same little tune, and if you keep dying, which you will, it just restarts. So, they took the good away from the music.
Overall, like I said, the presentation is just a mixed bag. And it's really a shame because I like this claymation style.
Josh, have you ever considered doing claymation for this show?
Yeah, right. I can barely do puppetry.
When do you ever do puppetry?
So, even though I haven't had the nicest things to say about Claymates, what do I think of the game overall? Well, to me, Claymates is two things. First, it's a game that just doesn't hold up 20 years later. I'm not sure how good it was when it was first released, but no amount of nostalgia goggles can fix a game this poorly made. And the more you play it, the more you start to realize the second thing this game is to me. A perfect example of wasted potential. This feels like something you'd find in a make-your-own platforming game tutorial. But the designers, instead of changing the placeholder objects, just went with what they gave them. Basic enemies, an even more basic main character, bland power-ups in the form of generic animals that could have been given a purpose outside of one special ability, underwhelming boss battles, gameplay with tacked on and practically useless collectibles, horrendous control functionality that makes me want to throw the controller against the wall, and music that makes me want to jab a needle into my eardrums. And this mess is sadly mixed together with a story and graphical style that with a bit of imagination could have made for an interesting and one-of-a-kind game. Claymates is the kind of game you see at a flea market or a retro game store. It's usually cheap. You get intrigued, so you buy it, you play it, then after about 5 minutes you turn it off and go, well, that was cute, and then never play it again. And if you do play it for an extended period of time, you find just how confusing and frustrating it is. Even though I never played it as a kid, from what I saw, it looked fun. You can imagine how excited I was when I finally found it, and how disappointed I felt when I played it. This is a game I should have just kept in my memories. But now those memories are tarnished, and because of that, Claymates belongs in the shadows.
So, Josh, what game are we going to review in a couple weeks?
Actually, Sid, that reminds me. There's something I wanted to talk about. This has been such a great year, not just for this show, but also myself. All of the amazing people I've met, the friends I've made, and just how far this show has come. When times get tough, I can always count on you guys for help and support and understanding my situations. I was amazed that I got so many entries for the Super Mario 64 video. And overall, I've just had so much fun doing these reviews. Spending the summer looking at Disney games, the Halloween specials, and everything in between. Even the bad games, I love just seeing everyone's reactions to them. No, JG Reviews isn't ending, but we're going on a short break before Season 3.
But I want to do more reviews.
We will. Don't worry. It's just, right now, we need to go on a break.
Well, what are you gonna do?
Well, I've been working on this show so much. I think it's time I start working on myself. Here we go.